At Christmas dinner, my dad announced, "We're selling the family business. You're getting nothing." My siblings smirked. I asked, "Who's the buyer?" He grinned. "Cardinal Logistics." I smiled back. "Dad, I am Cardinal Logistics." The room went silent. Then I dropped the real bomb. All right, Reddit. This story spans 12 years of careful planning, but the real fireworks started last Christmas and continued for an entire year of warfare. Since then, it's been a masterpiece of family dysfunction and the sweetest revenge you've ever seen. Names changed for obvious reasons. I'm 35 male, the middle son in my family. My dad Antonio runs a logistics company, let's call it Crosswind Freight, started by my grandfather in 1982, hauling steel between factories with a single beat-up Peterbilt. Dad took over in 98 and built it into a regional freight empire. By the time I was old enough to understand business, we were living in Naperville with more square footage than we knew what to do with. My older brother Vincent is the golden child and the biggest entitled piece of shit you've ever met. 6'2", played mediocre football at state until he blew out his knee sophomore year, then coasted through a business management degree with daddy's donations, keeping his GPA above water. The day after graduation, Dad handed him an $80,000 operations manager position like he'd earned it instead of just being born first. Vincent treats the company like his personal ATM, shows up hungover 3 days a week, takes 2-hour business lunches at strip clubs, and has never met a company expense he couldn't justify. Dude bought a $60,000 truck for client meetings and uses it to haul his jet ski to the lake every weekend. Then there's my younger sister Amara, a walking Instagram thirst trap who turned our family name into her personal brand. Her Trucking Heiress lifestyle blog has 200,000 simps following her from the warehouse to wealth bullshit. This girl has never set foot in an actual warehouse, thinks logistics means being logical about shopping, and calls herself an industry insider while posting bikini shots next to our trucks. And me? I'm the one who actually inherited Grandpa's work ethic and Dad's head for numbers. Been obsessed with supply chain optimization since high school, went to Northwestern for industrial engineering and economics, graduated magna cum laude. But somehow, every time there was a strategy meeting around the dinner table, Dad would look right through me like I was the help. Mom Eleanor comes from a family of Chicago cops, which means her solution to family conflict is either enabling the golden children or drowning her problems in wine. She's the queen of toxic positivity. Damien, why can't you be more supportive of your brother's success, while completely ignoring that Vincent's success consists of showing up drunk and harassing the receptionist? The breaking point came when I was 23. Fresh out of Northwestern, I'd developed a route optimization algorithm that could have cut our operating costs by 30%. Spent 3 months building spreadsheets, running simulations, creating a presentation that would have made McKinsey consultants weep. Dad finally agreed to let me present to the management team as a learning experience. Picture this: a conference room that smelled like coffee and diesel fumes, middle management guys who'd been with the company since the Clinton administration, me with my laptop and color-coded charts. 15 minutes into my presentation, Dad checks his watch and cuts me off. "All right, son, that's enough," he says with that shit-eating smirk that says he's enjoying crushing my dreams. This computer stuff is real creative, but trucking's about relationships and experience, not fancy math from some college boy who's never gotten his hands dirty. Then he turns to his team with theatrical dismissal. My youngest son just got out of college, still thinking like a textbook instead of real world. Kids these days think they can change everything with spreadsheets. Vincent here understands what this business actually needs: real leadership, not academic theories. The humiliation burned like battery acid. That night, sitting in my best friend Silas's apartment drinking cheap drinks and plotting my escape, I made a decision that would change everything. "We're gonna build our own company," I told him. "And when we're done, these assholes won't know what hit them." There was one family member who saw through all this bullshit from day one. My dad's younger brother, Arthur. Uncle Arthur, 60, is everything my dad pretends to be, but isn't. Started with nothing, built a successful construction company through actual hard work, then sold it for 8 figures. The guy's got more money than the rest of the family combined, but you'd never know it from his beat-up jeans and 20-year-old Ford pickup. He lives in Chicago, about an hour from the family house. Arthur and Dad have hated each other since they were kids, mainly because Arthur never bought into the Romano family mythology about being special. That weekend after the presentation disaster, I drove to Arthur's place and told him everything. "Good," he said when I finished explaining my plan. "Antonio needs to learn what happens when you underestimate people. How much startup capital do you need? I've got 8 grand saved and Silas has about 3. That's amateur hour, Arthur interrupted. You want to build something that'll make them shit themselves, you need real money. I'm in for $200,000, no strings attached. Call it an investment in watching my brother eat crow. That's how the war began. I just didn't know it yet. Years 1 through 3. The foundation. I moved to Atlanta with $8,000 in savings, a business plan that Silas and I had sketched out on bar napkins, and a $200,000 war chest, courtesy of Uncle Arthur. Dad thought it was just a phase, his college boy running off to play entrepreneur. He'll be back when he runs out of Daddy's money, I heard him telling Mom during one of our increasingly rare calls. Those early years were brutal as hell, even with Arthur's backing. Silas and I shared a decent apartment instead of a roach motel, but we still worked 90-hour weeks, surviving on energy drinks and the knowledge that every dollar spent wisely was another nail in my family's coffin. I created Cardinal Logistics under both Silas's and my names, but kept my involvement quiet. Started with one decent cargo van instead of a rust bucket, and contracts for last-mile delivery that bigger companies didn't want to touch. Every dollar went back into the business, except for modest living expenses and Arthur's quarterly updates. Arthur would call every few months to check in, usually while working on some car in his garage. How's the empire coming, kid? Your dad still think you're playing pretend businessman? Getting there. Slower than I'd like, but we're building something solid. Good. Take your time. Do it right. Years. 4 to 8, the growth phase. Silas handled the street-level operations. The guy could sweet-talk dock workers and negotiate with dispatchers, like he was born for it. I focused on the back end, route optimization, client acquisition, and slowly building relationships with manufacturers who needed reliable freight partners. The breakthrough came in year 5, when a major automotive parts manufacturer was looking for a logistics partner who could handle their just-in-time delivery requirements. The big companies were too inflexible, the small ones too unreliable. We were right in that sweet spot, big enough to handle volume, small enough to adapt quickly. That contract led to 3 more. By year 8, we had 40 trucks, 60 employees, and clients across the Southeast. Silas became my COO and co-owner. The guy had earned every percentage point through blood, sweat, and creative problem-solving. Years 9 to 12, the intelligence gathering. Arthur visited our Atlanta facility that year, walking through our modern dispatch center and maintenance bays, with the satisfied look of a man watching his investment pay off. Antonio would have an aneurysm if he saw this place, he said, admiring our computer-controlled routing system. State-of-the-art everything. Happy employees. Actual profit margins. Everything his operation should be, but isn't. The whole time, I kept my family in the dark. During holiday calls, I kept it vague. Transportation stuff. Doing all right down here. Dad never pressed for details because he'd already written off my career as some extended tantrum. But here's the kicker. For the past 3 years, I'd been quietly studying Crosswind Freight's operation. Public financial filings, industry reports, conversations with mutual clients. The company was bleeding money due to outdated routing, bloated overhead, and Vincent's brilliant growth strategies that involved expensive equipment they couldn't efficiently utilize. Arthur had been feeding me insider information too. Word was getting around that Antonio Romano was struggling. Your brother's destroying that company one bad decision at a time, Arthur told me during one of our calls. Antonio's too proud to admit he needs help, and Vincent is too stupid to see the problems he's creating. They're screwed and they don't even know it yet. 6 months before Christmas, I had my lawyers send an anonymous acquisition offer through a shell company. Dad rejected it without even scheduling a meeting. Too proud to admit he needed help, even from a faceless corporation offering a lifeline. That's when I decided it was time to go nuclear. The week before Christmas, I was sitting in my corner office, overlooking the Atlanta skyline, putting the finishing touches on what would either be the greatest business coup in Romano family history or a spectacular way to blow up every relationship I'd ever known. Probably both. Silas knocked and entered with 2 cups of coffee and his trademark shit-eating grin. So we really doing this family holiday kamikaze mission? Absolutely. It's time these people learned what underestimating us costs. My phone buzzed with a text from Arthur. Flight lands at 3 p.m. This is going to be beautiful. Yeah, that's right. Uncle Arthur was flying into Chicago too. I'd spent the week preparing for Chicago like I was planning a military operation. Gone were the casual clothes they associated with my failure phase. Instead, tailored suits, a Rolex Submariner that cost more than Dad paid most drivers annually, leather shoes that cost what some people spend on rent. The family house looked exactly the same. Oversized suburban architecture, Perfectly maintained lawn despite the December snow, holiday lights wrapped around everything like the place was auditioning for a Christmas movie. Dad's home office was exactly what you'd expect. Leather furniture, mahogany desk, walls covered with industry awards. The smell of expensive cigars and insecurity hung in the air. I knocked once and walked in without waiting. Power move, but subtle. Dad looked up from his computer, surprise flickering across his weathered face, before settling into his usual mix of disappointment and mild irritation. Damien, you made it home. He stood for an awkward handshake-hug combo. How's business? Can't complain, I replied, glancing at the papers scattered across his desk. Financial reports, legal documents, and there, partially hidden under a trucking industry magazine, the Cardinal Logistics acquisition proposal, with our logo clearly visible. My heart hammered, but I kept my expression neutral. How about you? Vincent keeping busy. Before Dad could elaborate, his phone rang. Excuse me, this is important, he said, turning away to answer. I used the opportunity to scan the visible documents more carefully. There it was, the full acquisition package, legal terms, and what looked like correspondence from his attorney, recommending acceptance. My company's offer to buy his company, and he had no idea his failure son was behind it. Sorry about that, he said, hastily gathering the papers. Lot of moving pieces right now. Big opportunities for the company. Christmas dinner at the Romano house was always a production, and this year Mom had outdone herself. The dining room table was set with the good china that only came out for holidays and impressing clients. The smell of prime rib and Mom's famous Yorkshire pudding filled the house. Seating followed traditional Romano hierarchy. Dad at the head, Vincent at his right hand, Amara to his left. Mom took the foot of the table, with Silas and me relegated to the side positions. Vincent dominated the conversation with his usual toxic bullshit, bragging about putting employees in their place and how he'd fired 3 drivers for attitude problems. These people need to understand their place in the hierarchy, Vincent said, cutting his steak like he was discussing livestock. Dad built this company on discipline and respect. You give these drivers an inch, they take a mile. Dad nodded approvingly. Vincent gets it. You can't run a business like a democracy. In the real world, some people are leaders and some people follow orders. The dig was clearly aimed at me, even though I was sitting right there. After a few minutes of the bullshit, Dad decided to drop the bomb. Well, Damien, I have some news. Yeah? We're selling the family business. Silence. Are you? Yes. And since you contributed nothing but disappointment, you're also getting nothing. Thought you should know, son, he told me, as my siblings smirked. I coldly asked, and who's the buyer? Cardinal Logistics. $50 million, he said proudly. I just smiled at him, and that's when the doorbell rang. Mom looked confused. Who could that be? We're not expecting anyone else. My pulse quickened. Right on schedule. From the dining room, we heard Mom's voice from the front door. Arthur? What on earth? We had no idea you were in town. The silence at the dinner table was immediate and absolute. Dad's fork stopped halfway to his mouth, his face cycling through several shades of confusion and anger. Who the hell invited him? Dad muttered under his breath. Arthur walked into the dining room like he owned the place, wearing his usual uniform of worn jeans, flannel shirt, and steel-toed boots. Merry Christmas, Antonio, Arthur said with a grin that was equal parts friendly and screw you. Vincent. Amara. He turned to me and Silas with exaggerated surprise. Well, I'll be damned. Damien. Dad's face was now purple. Arthur. What the hell are you doing here? Can't a man visit his family for Christmas? Arthur asked innocently, pulling out the empty chair next to me. Besides, I had some business in Chicago. Thought I'd combine pleasure with, well, more pleasure. Business? Amara asked, immediately perking up. Oh, just some investment opportunities, Arthur said casually. Kid's been keeping me busy with his ventures down in Atlanta. The words hit like a physical slap. Dad's fork clattered to his plate. What ventures? Vincent demanded. Arthur looked at me with theatrical surprise. Oh, didn't you tell them about Cardinal Logistics? Hell, Damien, I thought family was supposed to know about each other's successes. The room temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. Dad was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Cardinal Logistics, he repeated slowly. The company that's trying to buy us. Not trying, Arthur corrected cheerfully. Already bought. Deals signed, sealed, and delivered. My nephew here owns your company as of tomorrow morning. What followed was the most beautiful chaos I'd ever witnessed. Dad pushed back from the table so hard his chair tipped over. Vincent started hyperventilating. Amara's phone was recording everything. Shut up! This is impossible! Dad sputtered. Cardinal Logistics is run by serious business people, not by my failure son playing pretend in Atlanta. Actually, Antonio, Arthur said, Cardinal Logistics is run by two very serious business people. Your son, who's smarter than you ever gave him credit for, and his partner here, who's tougher than you ever were. Oh, and funded by your black sheep brother, who you've been ignoring for 20 years. Arthur leaned back with satisfaction. See, while you've been running your little kingdom into the ground and teaching Vincent how to embezzle from company accounts, Damien and I have been building something that actually works. That hit like a freight train. Dad whipped around to stare at his golden child, who had gone completely white. What the hell is he talking about, Vincent? Before Vincent could deny it, I pulled out my tablet. $75,000 over 18 months, Dad. Phantom maintenance contracts, inflated parts purchases, ghost employees. I've got transaction records, IP logs showing the falsified entries came from Vincent's office computer. Vincent was making sounds like a dying fish. This is ridiculous. Dad, he's bluffing. I never... No, Arthur grinned. This is due diligence, something you should have learned in that business degree Antonio bought you. Dad sank back into his chair like someone had deflated him. Why? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Why would you do this to your own family? I looked at him across the wreckage of Christmas dinner, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. Because, Dad, 12 years ago, you told me I had to choose between being your son and being successful. You made that choice for me when you decided Vincent's birthright was more important than my competence. Arthur raised his bottle in a mock toast. Here's to Antonio Romano, who spent so many years looking down on people that he forgot to look up and see his own son building an empire right over his head. But as Arthur headed for the door after delivering his final shots, something in Dad's expression shifted. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by something harder. This isn't over, he said quietly. Arthur paused at the doorway. What's that, Antonio? I said this isn't over? You think you can just waltz in here, humiliate my family, and steal my life's work? You have no idea what you've started. Vincent had found his voice again, the color returning to his face along with his old arrogance. Yeah, this corporate espionage bullshit won't hold up in court. We'll see who's laughing when my lawyers are done with you. Amara had stopped recording. This is going to make such good content, she muttered. Arthur grinned. Bring it on, Antonio. Let's see what you've got. As the door slammed behind him, I realized something important. The Christmas dinner reveal hadn't been the end of the story. It had been the opening shot in what was about to become a very ugly war. They were going to fight back. Hard. And honestly, I was looking forward to it. 3 days after Christmas, I was back in Atlanta reviewing integration plans for the Crosswind acquisition, when my assistant buzzed in with a concerned look. Damien, you need to see this. There's been some developments. She handed me a tablet showing the Chicago Business Journal's morning edition. The headline made my blood run cold. Family feud turns corporate. Local trucking dynasty torn apart by hostile takeover. The article was brutal. Vincent had clearly spent the past 72 hours spinning a narrative that painted me as a backstabbing opportunist who'd exploited family connections and confidential information to engineer a raid. According to him, I was the ungrateful son who'd manipulated my elderly uncle's grief over family divisions to fund a revenge scheme against my successful father and brother. My phone was already ringing. Silas's name on the caller ID. You see this shit? He asked without preamble. Reading it now. How bad is the damage? 3 clients called this morning asking about the family drama and whether it'll affect service reliability. Our bank wants a conference call about the acquisition financing, and our insurance company is suddenly very interested in reviewing our policies. The media blitz was just the beginning. Vincent had hired one of Chicago's most aggressive corporate litigation firms. What are they claiming? I asked Silas. Breach of fiduciary duty, corporate espionage, fraudulent concealment of material facts. They're asking for an injunction to block the acquisition pending a full investigation. They want discovery on every communication between you, Arthur, and anyone connected to Crosswind over the past 5 years. A legal challenge could tie up the acquisition for months, maybe years. Even if we eventually won, the uncertainty would damage both companies. But they'd made one critical error. They'd underestimated me. Arthur had spent 40 years in Chicago business circles. He knew where all the bodies were buried, and more importantly, he knew how to dig them up. Antonio's been calling every trucking company between Chicago and Detroit, Arthur told me during one of our calls, telling them you stole proprietary information and that any business with Cardinal could expose them to lawsuits. The bastard's trying to poison the well with our suppliers too. But the next move was already in motion. Remember Jackie Sullivan? Arthur asked. I remembered Jackie, former Crosswind driver who'd filed a wrongful termination suit against the company 3 years ago. The case had been settled out of court with a non-disclosure agreement. Jackie wasn't wrongfully terminated for performance issues like Antonio claimed. He was fired because he caught Vincent running fake maintenance contracts and threatened to report it. Arthur gave me Jackie's number, and I had him on a Zoom call that same night. I walked him through what breaking the NDA legally looked like and made sure his documentation landed on Dalton's desk before morning. Same with Dad's sabotage trail. Arthur tipped me off, but I pushed our legal team to subpoena supplier call logs and email metadata before Dad could cover his tracks. The guy was bitter about losing his job and furious about the settlement. Vincent paid him 30 grand to keep quiet about what he'd seen. But NDAs don't cover criminal activity, and Jackie's got documentation. Meanwhile, Amara had launched a sophisticated propaganda campaign. Her latest video series, How Big Business Destroys Families, was gaining serious traction. She'd somehow convinced 2 business school professors to appear as expert commentators on the ethics of using family connections for competitive advantage. The Romano case represents a troubling trend, one professor intoned, while Amara nodded sympathetically, where family relationships are weaponized for corporate gain, destroying traditional values in pursuit of profit. It was working. Cardinal's social media mentions were increasingly negative, and several business publications had picked up Amara's narrative about corporate family abuse. But Amara had made her own mistake. She got greedy and spun up a trucking heiress merch shop for t-shirts, mugs, and boss posters. Our audit pulled Amara's LLC filings for the merch shop, and she'd been sloppy with the paperwork. Girl's been claiming business deductions for shit that's clearly personal, Arthur explained. The IRS audit I triggered is finding some very interesting discrepancies. 2 weeks into February, the war had escalated beyond anything I'd imagined. Vincent's latest move was freaking diabolical. He'd somehow convinced 3 former Cardinal employees, drivers we'd laid off during a restructuring 6 months ago, to sign affidavits claiming I'd instructed them to deliberately damage Crosswind shipments while they were subcontracted to us during a busy period last year. The allegations were bullshit, but they were detailed and professionally prepared. His lawyers had clearly coached these guys carefully. According to their sworn statements, I'd paid them bonuses to accidentally delay Crosswind deliveries and report false mechanical problems that would make Crosswind look unreliable to shared clients. 2 more clients had suspended contracts pending resolution of the ongoing legal uncertainties. Our insurance company was threatening to cancel our coverage, and the State Transportation Authority was now conducting a full audit of our operating procedures. Vincent was burning down everything just to spite us, but it was about to backfire. March. Assembling our arsenal. The next morning, I walked into our Atlanta headquarters like a man going into battle, which essentially I was. First stop, our legal team. I'd retained Dalton, Blake, and Associates, the kind of lawyers who made Kellerman and Associates look like traffic court attorneys. Their senior partner, Elizabeth Dalton, was a former federal prosecutor who'd made her reputation dismantling corporate fraud cases. Mr. Romano, she said, reviewing the files I'd brought, your family's legal team is making serious allegations. But they've made a critical error, which is, they've opened discovery. That means we get to examine their records too. Every email, every financial transaction, every communication between Vincent Romano and anyone connected to Crosswind Freight over the past 5 years. She smiled like a shark scenting blood. If your uncle's documentation of the embezzlement is as comprehensive as you've indicated, this case is about to become very uncomfortable for the plaintiffs. Dalton's plan was elegant in its brutality. First, we file a countersuit for defamation, tortious interference with business relationships, and fraud. Second, we request expedited discovery on all financial records. Third, we hold a press conference tomorrow afternoon. While Dalton's team prepped our legal response, I orchestrated the counterattack. Arthur fed me leads. Amara's about to have a very bad day, he said with satisfaction. Turns out the IRS is very interested in influencers who claim business expenses for exotic vacations, while calling them industry research. Arthur had been quietly documenting Amara's ignorance of the industry she claimed to represent. Videos of her mispronouncing logistics terms, photos of her posing with equipment she couldn't identify, recordings of conversations where she admitted she'd never actually read a transportation contract. But the real leverage came from Jackie Sullivan's files. I had our team surface patterns of fraud that went far beyond what we'd initially seen. Jackie had kept copies of fake invoices, photos of maintenance that never happened, and records of the payment Vincent made to buy his silence. We're looking at potentially $300,000 over 4 years, Dalton told me after reviewing Jackie's evidence. Vincent Romano has been very, very busy. The beautiful part is that his legal team probably doesn't know about most of this yet. They filed suit thinking they were fighting a corporate espionage case. What they've actually done is opened up a criminal fraud investigation. April. The press conference Friday morning brought the first sign that our counterattack was working. Amara's latest video had been taken down by Instagram for violating community guidelines around harassment and doxing. Her account had been temporarily suspended pending review. Arthur's connections in digital marketing had moved fast and efficiently. Social media platforms don't like influencers who weaponize their followers for harassment campaigns, he explained. But our real victory came that afternoon during our press conference. Dalton had arranged for us to hold it at Cardinal's Atlanta headquarters, with our modern fleet and efficient operations visible in the background. The contrast to Crosswind's aging facilities in Chicago was deliberate and stark. I wore my best suit and projected calm confidence, while Dalton systematically dismantled my family's allegations. Then came the sledgehammer. During the discovery process for this litigation, serious questions have emerged about financial irregularities at Crosswind Freight. We have identified evidence of potential embezzlement exceeding $300,000 over a 4-year period. She held up a thick folder of documents. These irregularities appear to center around Vincent Romano, the current operations manager and son of company founder Antonio Romano. Within an hour, the story had shifted from family feud over business acquisition to trucking company embroiled in embezzlement scandal. That evening, my phone rang. Dad's number. "You son of a bitch," he said without preamble. "You're destroying my family." "No, Dad. I'm defending my company. You and Vincent started this war when you decided to attack Cardinal with lies and threats. Don't blame me for fighting back with facts. Those embezzlement allegations are bullshit and you know it." "Are they?" "Because your lawyers just turned over financial records that show Vincent has been stealing from you for years. Maybe you should be thanking me for exposing it instead of attacking me for buying your failing company." The silence stretched out for long seconds. "This isn't over," he said finally. "You're right," I replied. "It's not. But every day you keep fighting, more evidence comes out. You sure you want to keep escalating this?" He hung up without answering. Vincent had wanted to play hardball. Now he was going to learn what hardball actually looked like. Vincent was facing serious legal problems. The FBI's white-collar crime unit had opened an investigation into the embezzlement allegations. His passport had been flagged, and his bank accounts were frozen pending the outcome of the federal inquiry. The evidence was overwhelming. Jackie Sullivan had provided documentation of fake maintenance contracts with shell companies, inflated parts purchases where Vincent pocketed the difference, and ghost employees whose paychecks went straight to accounts he controlled. 2 other former drivers had come forward with similar stories about being pressured to keep quiet about Vincent's schemes. June-August, the sabotage campaign. Instead of folding, he and Dad went scorched earth. Ex-employees signing coached affidavits, suppliers getting cold-called with scare tactics, and mutual clients hearing just enough rumor to hesitate. Legal fees bled both companies. 2 more clients froze their contracts, and our insurance carrier started reviewing every clause in our policies. Amara had initially tried to keep fighting through social media, but the tax fraud investigation had destroyed her credibility. Her follower count had crashed from 80,000 to barely 45,000. Her sponsor deals had evaporated, and she was posting increasingly desperate content. Her latest video series was painful to watch. She looked haggard, her usual polished presentation replaced by manic energy and increasingly wild claims about corporate conspiracy theories. September. The nuclear option. We'd been building our own arsenal. Beyond Jackie Sullivan, I tracked down 2 more witnesses willing to testify about Vincent's fraud. One driver had been pressured to falsify delivery reports and kept copies of the cash payments Vincent made for his silence. Using Arthur's tips, I had our team pull phone records, subpoena supplier emails, and record calls with vendors Antonio had leaned on. "Antonio's been operating like this is still 1985, Arthur explained. "He doesn't understand that everything leaves a digital trail now. Everything gets documented somewhere." Dalton's team had compiled evidence of tortious interference that could result in millions in damages. Dad's reputation in the industry was being destroyed by his own desperate attempts to damage ours. By October, the war was taking its toll on everyone, but an unexpected ally emerged: Mom. Eleanor had been watching her family tear itself apart for 10 months. The stress was destroying her marriage, her relationship with her children, and her standing in their social circle. She called me on a Tuesday evening, her voice hollow with exhaustion. "Damien, this has to stop. Your father hasn't slept in weeks. Vincent is drinking too much and talking about leaving the country. Amara's gotten so caught up in her online drama that she's forgotten this is supposed to be about family. Mom, I didn't start this war. I know, but you're the only one who can end it. She was wrong about that. I wasn't interested in ending anything until I'd won completely. But what she told me next changed everything. Your father's been hiding something from Vincent and Amara. The company's debts are much worse than anyone knows. Even with the money from selling to you, we're going to lose the house. Antonio mortgaged everything to keep Crosswind afloat these past 2 years. The revelation hit like cold water. How bad is it? Foreclosure proceedings start next month. The lawyers are costing us $50,000 a month. If this fight continues much longer, we'll lose everything. For the first time since Christmas dinner, I felt something other than cold satisfaction. Not sympathy exactly, but a recognition that this war was destroying everyone involved. What do you want me to do? Meet with your father, just the two of you. No lawyers, no cameras, no Uncle Arthur stirring up trouble. Just a father and son trying to find a way forward. I agreed to the meeting, but I wasn't going into it unarmed. If Dad wanted mercy, he was going to pay for it on my terms. The next morning, I called Dalton with new instructions. Prepare a final settlement offer. The meeting was set for the following Saturday. Neutral ground, a conference room at Dalton's law firm in downtown Chicago. November, the final meeting. The conference room was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, polished mahogany table that could seat 20, law books lining the walls like silent witnesses to countless battles. Dad showed up looking like he'd aged 5 years and 11 months. The man who used to stride into rooms like he owned them now moved with the careful precision of someone trying not to appear broken. I deliberately arrived 15 minutes early, positioned myself at the head of the table with the settlement documents arranged in front of me like battle plans. Dalton sat to my right, her laptop open and recording equipment visible. Antonio, Dalton said when Dad entered, thank you for coming. Please, have a seat. Dad glanced around the room, taking in the power dynamics, then chose a chair halfway down the table, far enough to maintain some dignity, close enough to read the documents I'd be sliding across to him. Before we begin, Dalton continued, I need to inform you that this conversation is being recorded, and that anything you say may be used in ongoing legal proceedings. Dad's jaw tightened. This isn't what Eleanor promised me. This isn't a family reconciliation, I said calmly. This is a business meeting. Dalton pulled up a PowerPoint presentation on the wall screen. Let's review your current situation, shall we? The slides laid out the complete collapse of their position. Every lawsuit Vincent had filed and lost. Every motion that had been denied. Every discovery request that had backfired. Their legal fees to date, $347,000. Estimated fees to continue litigation through trial, $1.2 million. Current available assets to pay those fees, approximately $23,000. Additionally, Dalton continued, the FBI investigation into Vincent's activities has expanded. They're now looking at potential RICO violations related to the fake vendor scheme. That got a reaction. Dad's head snapped up. RICO, racketeering charges. If they determine that Vincent's embezzlement was part of a broader pattern of organized fraud involving other parties, this becomes a federal conspiracy case. The penalties are severe. I let that sink in for a moment before sliding the settlement agreement across the table. However, there's another option. Dad picked up the document with hands that trembled slightly. I watched his face as he read through the terms. Complete dismissal of all lawsuits with prejudice. Public retraction of all statements about Cardinal's business practices. Non-disclosure agreements preventing future discussion of the acquisition or the underlying family disputes. Vincent's resignation from any position in the logistics industry and agreement to repay all embezzled funds through a structured payment plan. In exchange, Cardinal would assume responsibility for Crosswind's remaining debts, prevent the foreclosure on the family home, and provide limited consulting positions for family members who could demonstrate actual competence. You're buying our silence, Dad said, after reading the full agreement. I'm buying your capitulation, I corrected. Your complete and unconditional admission that you lost. Dad set down the document and looked directly at me for the first time since entering the room. What do you want me to say, Damien? He didn't look up. You want the company? You've got it. But don't think this makes you better than me. No, I said quietly. I'm not happy, but I'm satisfied. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the lake. I didn't do this for revenge, Dad. I did it because I wanted to build something worthwhile, and you made it clear there was no place for me in your version of the family business. When I turned back, Dad was slumped in his chair like a deflated balloon. Dalton placed a pen on the table next to the settlement documents. We need your signature on all 3 copies, she said, and we'll need Vincent and Amara to sign their portions within 48 hours. Dad picked up the pen and stared at it for a long moment. Then he signed the documents with surrender. 5 years later, I was standing in my corner office at Cardinal's expanded Chicago headquarters, formerly Crosswind Freight's main facility, watching our drivers prep for the morning routes. The integration was complete, the legal battles were history, and business was better than ever. Dalton had been right about the leverage. Once Vincent realized he was facing federal prison time, he'd signed everything we put in front of him. His plea agreement included full restitution, 5 years probation, and a permanent ban from working in transportation. He moved to Denver and now sells insurance, driving a used car. Amara's social media empire had completely collapsed. The tax fraud investigation had destroyed her credibility. Her follower count crashed to barely 20,000, and she eventually signed the NDA in exchange for Cardinal covering her legal fees. Dad had surprised everyone by actually being useful as a consultant. Without the pressure of running a failing company or protecting Vincent's ego, he'd turned out to have valuable insights about client relationships and industry connections. But the real satisfaction came from watching Uncle Arthur enjoy his victory lap. Arthur split his time between his place outside Chicago and visiting our operations. His official title was Strategic Advisor, but his real job was making sure I never forgot how sweet revenge could taste. You know what the best part is? Arthur said, joining me at the window with 2 cups of coffee. Antonio actually respects you now. It took 3 decades and a federal investigation, but he finally figured out that you're smarter than he is. Think he learned anything? Arthur's grin was sharp. He learned that underestimating people has consequences. Whether he stays learned is up to him. We stood there watching our trucks roll out, carrying freight for clients across 6 states, operated by employees who were paid fairly and treated with respect. Everything Crosswind should have been, but wasn't. And every time Dad walks into my office, he has to remember exactly who owns the chair he's sitting in.